After I read the latest chapter of One Piece, chapter 1106, I won't lie to you, I was disappointed. After all that talk of pacifistas looking like Bonnie's father Kuma being the reason for her death as she is a pirate now, the tragedy was growing only for Vegapunk to reveal in this chapter, oh yes, I made all these weapons knowing the terrible people I was handing them to, instead of caring about how many lives it will destroy or at least making sure the control of this Seraphim and pacifistas goes to Dragon, even if I have to sacrifice myself for it. But no, Vegapunk didn't do any of that. Vegapunk didn't even think any of that. Instead, he gave the command to Bonnie, further making himself a disappointment of a character, an idiot of a scientist, which he already was turning out to be, considering how many idiotic decisions he has taken, but also taking away from the tragedy of Kuma, who was the sun for many people, and also potentially messing up the theme of the curse of the sun, which has been pretty prevalent in the story, either with Moria and his devil fruit and what that did to people, or with Bonnie and Ginny and their disease of the sapphire scales. Kuma, at least as a phase being used as a tool for destruction, would have contributed heavily to the dichotomy even the sun has in One Piece. But Oda threw all that out. Well, at least that's what I thought at first when I read the chapter. I didn't like this chapter, felt Oda was again pulling some shenanigans, but after giving it a thought and rereading Kuma's backstory, I have come to realize that this might be one of Oda's best setups for the final saga, on the level of the Cross Guild even. And the reason it might suffer in terms of connecting to the audience will be Wano and what happened with Kinemon and Kiku, and also how uninteresting Vegapunk has been, or perhaps Vegapunk hasn't been fully realized yet as a character, which I hope is the case. So let's dive into this new development of the pacifistas fighting on the side of the sun god Nika, on our side against the celestial dragons in the final war, those who have been responsible for turning even the sun into a curse. To understand this completely, we have to look at Kuma's character first and what he stood for while he still had his consciousness, his will. Kuma's entire life he has suffered through slavery under the celestial dragons. As part of the buccaneer tribe, he was put through the worst kind of torture imaginable. Yet that didn't stop him from being kind. The death of his mother, the absolute inhumane way his father was shot down right in front of him, with his father's blood on his face, just for making a bit of a noise. All that didn't stop who Kuma was at his core and who he idolized. Nika was Kuma's salvation, and he always wanted to be like him, the one who brings laughter and freedom. So that's what Kuma aspired to be. He becomes the light for the people he meets and helps them to freedom, even if it comes at the cost of his own. From saving all the slaves at God Valley to all his acts in the kingdom of Sorbet and what he did with the revolutionary army, how he helped the old people and took their own pain upon himself. Kuma truly lived up to what Ivankov calls him in chapter 1096, the hands of liberation. Maybe not on the same level as Nika, but bringing freedom to all those he meets, as many people as he meets. Maybe not the dawn of the world, the legend that the world's been waiting for, but the dawn for some. And that is why Kuma being the face of the world government's tyranny was an absolute genius move before on Oda's part. Kuma's entire character, what he represented to many around the world, the pacifistas would be the opposite of that. Not the sun like Kuma was, wherever he went, but a curse on innocence, and the bringers of slavery and death. That's why I was so disappointed at first on all this pacifista joining our side. On Bonnie having the controls over all felt like too much of a cop-out. Pretty much the replay of the Tama situation, but on a larger scale, which could risk ruining the series finale. But after I did a bit of a thinking on it, I think my initial impression on what I took from this chapter was wrong. The decision of pacifistas joining our side, at least the Kuma ones, could be a brilliant move if it's done right. It's an amazing concept. If we wanted to describe Kuma with a title, it would be The Hands of Liberation, without a shadow of doubt. Well, that's what these pacifistas are going to be. When the final war happens, when the Marines follow the world government, Marines who are humans who should fight for freedom instead help the world government in the final war. Maybe out of confusion, but the Marines would probably help the world government in maintaining the order of slavery against the sun god, Nika, and all those who follow him. Maybe not all the Marines, but most would probably follow the world government. At that time, the ones who would help in bringing freedom, who would fight on Nika's side, won't be humans or any great revolutionaries, but just a shadow of the man whose face they all wear. All the pacifistas would act as Luffy's hands in the final war. Luffy, who is Nika, who represents freedom and liberation, the pacifistas would act as his arms, as the official hands of liberation, fulfilling Kuma's dream of being Nika. When I first read the chapter, I wasn't happy, considering it could end up ruining many things in the story. The dichotomy behind the sun in One Piece, making the world government far less of an intimidating force in the story, and turning Luffy's escape from Egghead to a far easier situation. With just the giants, it would have been fine, but pacifistas, their turn in the story, seem to take out too much tension from the situations that we have currently or we are going to have in the future. But apparently, if done right, it could turn into a brilliant decision as good or even better than the Cross Guild, which is saying a lot. The Cross Guild is an amazing concept. Again, all of this depends on execution. The concept is amazing. What Kuma and Vegapunk originally intended the pacifistas to be a force of pacifism, of freedom, of liberation, of hope to the people. If the pacifistas end up being what Kuma initially wanted them to be, thus making Kuma a bigger character in the story, a more prevalent character in the story, a more prevalent character who has his presence even in the final war, which would be a big punch in the gut for Celestial Dragons and Saturn especially. So it all depends on execution. So that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope I will see you next time.